Out in a magical forest, a flight of soft butterflies fluttered through the air, their wings beating against the shadow of sunset. Puck, a mischievous fairy, pranced amongst the butterflies, making them swirl around him. The forest air grew tense. Oberon, king of the fairies, was in a month-long argument with his queen, Titania. She had acquired a changeling child, and Oberon wanted it for himself, to be his most important attendant. A fluttering of fairy wings danced through the night in the forest, their dresses sparkling of moonlight that shone through the leaves. Titania's fairy handmaids led them through a beautiful dance. Peas blossoms spun in her dress made of petals, with moth and mustard seed gleaming in the colours of yellow and brown. Cobweb caught the light on her glistening dress, as if she was made of dewdrops falling on a morning spiderweb. Then Oberon appeared, searching for his queen, who arrived holding the hand of the small changeling child. They greeted each other, then argued over possession of the child, one just as stubborn as the other. No matter what Oberon said to her, Titania would not let him have the child. In his frustration, Oberon grabbed the child's hand and the two played tug-of-war with him. In a huff, Titania took the child and left Oberon alone in the forest. Oberon had a sudden spark of inspiration and summoned his jester, Puck. "What's going on?" Puck asked. "I need you to gather me a love in idleness flower." "Why?" "I'm going to use it on Titania. I will have her fall in love with an animal, so she will be so embarrassed, she will give me the changeling child." They both giggled, discussing their plan. Across the knots of vines and a tangle of tree roots, a disturbance rustled through the forest. The crunching of footsteps announced the arrival of Demetrius and his lover, Hermia. They were running away to elope. You see, Hermia's father was forcing her to marry Lysander, a young nobleman from their hometown. Following the lovers was Lysander himself. He had seen the couple slip away into the trees and snuck after his future bride into the forest. And then another scurry of footsteps declared Helena, chasing after the man she loved, Lysander. Except he didn't want anything to do with the young Helena. But Helena seemed not to notice his distaste and chased after him through the forest. Oberon witnessed the two couples, one so in love, the other not quite so. He called his nest of attendants, and they swarmed as they danced around him in the darkening forest, kicking up damp soil that filled the air with a crisp smell. Moonlight bounced off them as their feet scurried along the forest floor. Oberon swirled and leaped with them in between the forest branches. He sent his attendants away at the arrival of Puck, who had with him the magical flower he was sent to find. They finalised their plan, thinking over all the possible animals they could get Titania to fall in love with. "Perfect," muttered Oberon. Beyond the twisting of trees was a small clearing, and by the base of a magnificent glittering tree, the fairies were gathered, singing a lullaby for the changeling child. Titania danced to the beautiful lullaby, and her magnificent dress fell softly around her as she spun and hovered at the tree. Then she grew tired herself, and went into a hollow of the tree to sleep soundly in the night. The forest grew quiet as the fairies went away to their own hollows. Oberon appeared and crept over to the sleeping Titania. He shook some of the sap from the flower into her eyes. When she woke, she would fall madly in love with the first person she saw. Into the clearing, Demetrius and Hermia walked. Hermia was weary from walking and needed rest, so Demetrius made a comfortable patch of ground for her to sleep on. He went to join her, but Hermia stopped him. They were not yet married, and it was improper for them to rest together until they were. Demetrius then decided to go in for a good night kiss. but he only got to kiss her soft cheek. They called good nights to each other from the distant sleeping places and closed their heavy eyes. Puck entered the clearing, and seeing the couple sleeping so far apart, he thought this was the unhappy couple he could hear rushing through the forest earlier. "I can fix this!" he said, and he shook some flower sap into Demetrius's eyes. Lysander ran into the clearing, trying to find his betrothed and get away from the clingy Helena at the same time. But she soon ran into him, trying with all her might to get his attention. She ran towards him and leapt into his arms, but he dropped her heavily onto the dirt and grass of the clearing floor. Helena then found her old friend, sleeping soundly on the ground. She woke him and started to tell him of her troubles, but he did something strange. He started kissing her. "What are you doing?" she cried. "I love you, Helena!" Demetrius exclaimed. He tried to kiss the stunned Helena, and she ran away, closely followed by the suddenly love-struck Demetrius. But at this moment, Hermia woke and saw that her lover had disappeared. In a panic, she frantically called out for him, then ran into the trees of the forest to look for him. In the now empty clearing, a group of young actors appeared. They were a funny bunch of people, and their tomfoolery had had them banned from practicing their plays in the town. Having searched almost all night for a space to practice, they had finally found the clearing. They fumbled around and practiced their acrobatic skills, falling about with each other. They jumped and bounced in the clearing when all of a sudden, a donkey suddenly appeared in the clearing. It wore the same vest and trousers that their friend Bottom had been wearing. "It ate him!" they screamed and ran as the donkey galloped towards them. The donkey gambled about the clearing, kicking its hooves high into the air. It munched and crunched on some grass and scratched its back against a tree. Then the donkey felt someone watching it. Titania had woken from her slumber and was gazing upon the beautiful donkey before her. She approached the donkey, looking lovingly at its tough, bristly mane, the whiskers on its muzzle, its clonking hooves. She adored the way he snorted softly as she stroked its head, and was embraced by the lingering odour that wafted from the donkey. She was in love, and she called to her fairies to boast about her happiness. Her fairies were shocked. Should they tell their queen that this was a donkey? But of course, surely she would know. They uncertainly followed the commands of Titania and gave the donkey the respect that the queen's lover should have, showering him in flower wreaths and scratching his back. Then the donkey grew tired. It had been a long day for him. "I swear I was a man this morning," he thought to himself. Oberon watched as Titania led the donkey into her hollow, and they slumbered together in the darkness of the tree. Returning to the clearing now was a very exhausted Lysander. He could do no more running and searching tonight. He had to rest. Oberon went over to the sleeping young man and saw that Puck had not yet given him the sap of flower, even though Puck was certain he had. An angry Oberon swiftly went to drop the sap into Lysander's eyes. Proud that his plans were working, he fled with Puck as a new disturbance crackled through the trees. Helena was running away from Demetrius, who was now madly in love with her. But no matter what she did, she couldn't seem to be rid of him. They fumbled to the ground, and an exhausted Helena lay on the cold ground as something even more curious happened. Her face was plastered with the many loving kisses of Lysander, who not 10 minutes ago would have repelled her instantly. Stunned by the sudden influx of attention, Helena froze in bemusement. The two young men then fought for the hand of Helena. The befuddled Helena was caught between them as they scrabbled for her affection. Then Hermia arrived on the scene. "What are you doing, Demetrius?" she asked as she was tossed to the side while the boys fought over Helena. Hermia, in a fit of rage, shoved Helena in the back. The squabbling could be heard all across the forest, and they screamed and scratched at each other, pulling hair and slapping faces. They stormed out of the clearing, arguing at the top of their lungs and waking the entire forest from its slumber. Oberon turned an ugly eye on Puck. "What did you do?" But then he thought of a simple resolution. He summoned with his magical fairy powers a thick, dark fog to cover the forest. The fog came swiftly into the trees, and soon the fighting couples were lost amongst the thick blanket of fog. Barely able to see in front of them, they continued to fight inside the mist. But Puck was interfering, and soon the four fell under a kind of trance and became sleepy in the fog. They slept, resting against the trees in the clearing, Puck returning them to their rightful partners before giving Demetrius the sap of the magical flower again, to return his love for Hermia. The sun began to rise morning, and just as the warm light started to leak through the trees, Oberon went over to his sleeping queen and transformed the donkey back into a man. He then woke the sleeping Titania, who saw the stranger sleeping in her hollow. She didn't know what he could possibly be doing there, and stepping over him, greeted her fairy king. She then told Oberon how she thought she could remember falling in love with a donkey? Oberon, pleased his plan was working, denied any knowledge of the event. In her embarrassment, Titania gave Oberon the changeling child as a gift of apology. In the morning sun, a group of archers entered the forest for an early morning hunt, with the future queen of Athens, Hippolyta. Hippolyta and her huntresses leapt through the trees looking for their game to bring home. They split into small groups to cover more ground, bounding across the soft earth. They then arrived in a wonderful clearing, where they had space to see all the way up into the sky. Hippolyta then suddenly saw the red of a dress skirt, and called her huntresses to gather the king, as she saw blue skirts on the other side of the clearing. The king arrived, and Hippolyta showed the king the runaways, who had woken at the sound of his arrival. The king granted them each the ability to marry who they wanted to, and the happy couples were overjoyed. Hermia and Demetrius didn't need to run away now, and Helena and Lysander were suddenly very happy together. The couples made up with each other, both not quite sure what happened during the night, but very sure they wanted to never speak of it again. Another sudden rousing in the forest went very much unnoticed, as the man who had become a donkey woke, his joints feeling very stiff, and he was very, very confused. What a strange dream he had had. He had become a donkey, and it was kind of fun. It felt so good to scratch his back on the trees, and there was this girl, the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. Were they in love? Was it a dream? He suddenly realized he was alone in the forest clearing, and there was a cold breeze following him, with the feeling that someone was watching. Deeper into the forest, Titania and Oberon had made up from their argument, and they danced together in the depths of the trees, where no man could ever venture. They floated together, impassioned by their love for each other. The sunlight danced off them as they glittered together in swirls of rapturous happiness. On the outskirts of the forest, in Athens, a grand wedding was taking place. It was the wedding of Hippolyta and the king, Theseus. Next to them, also being married, were Hermia and Demetrius, and Helena and Lysander. The wedding was a magnificent whirl of bright colours as all the guests danced and the married couple spun with them in fits of happiness. It was the wedding of the century, and the celebrations could be heard all the way in the magical forest, where the frolic of fairies were ecstatic about the reunion of their king and queen. Every inch of Athens glowed with joy as the sun set. Memories of the magical forest forever in the minds of all those who were there that one fateful midsummer night.